Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content. Subscribe and turn on notifications. Asher Bennett spent the entire morning in a quiet trance, walking through every corner of his house as though he were seeing it for the first time. The fresh smell of paint lingered in the air, mingling with the faint scent of wood he had waxed the night before. The open windows allowed the late afternoon sunlight to filter in, casting a warm, golden hue on the newly restored walls. Asher wasn't in a rush. He walked slowly, his fingers grazing the surfaces of what had once been marked by cracks, water stains, and rust. Now everything had been renewed, solid, beautiful, and welcoming. But what touched Asher the most wasn't just the beauty of the renovations. It was the meaning behind every detail. 2 years of hard work, all starting from a single idea and a spark of hope. He had started alone, working on weekends, trading his work gloves for Marin's hugs whenever she arrived with a thermos of coffee and simple cupcakes wrapped in napkins. She'd sit on the porch, watching him hammer, sand, measure, and cut. Sometimes she'd offer suggestions, other times she'd just smile, quietly content with seeing how dedicated he was to this project. It was their shared dream. Asher remembered the day they bought the house. It was in terrible condition, broken windows, a roof ready to collapse, mold everywhere. The real estate agent had been surprised when he signed the papers without hesitation. "Are you sure?" she asked. Asher had answered firmly, "Yes, I can see what it will become." Marin had squeezed his hand in that moment, and the light in her eyes said it all. They weren't just buying a house, they were building a life. And now, as Asher walked through the rooms, looking at every wall he had erected and every floor he had laid himself, he felt a deep pride swelling in his chest. It wasn't pride because he had done it all with his own hands. It was because, through every detail, he had thought of her. He remembered when they installed the kitchen cabinets together. She had picked out the cup handles because they reminded her of her grandmother's house. In the living room, the beige couch that Marin had wanted so badly was already in place, with the blue throw she adored neatly folded over the back. The bookshelf was a collection of poetry and gardening books, a blend of their shared interests, built day by day with patience, respect, and countless conversations. His favorite room was the couple's bedroom, a simple space with subtle wallpaper and a window that overlooked the garden. That was the room where he had struggled to install a curtain rod, recalling how Marin had laughed as he fumbled with the drill, trying not to hurt his finger. That night, they had slept on a mattress on the floor, the house still under renovation, but their hearts already at peace. In the garden, the wooden swing hanging from the old oak swayed gently in the breeze. Asher had built it with the thought of the children they might one day have. They hadn't decided when, but they often talked about it. Sometimes Marin said she wanted two. Asher thought one would be perfect. They'd laugh, tossing around potential names, nursery ideas, toys scattered across the floor. Every conversation felt like a seed planted in their home. But now, standing there alone with only the wind and his own thoughts for company, Asher felt something stir within him, a strange restlessness he couldn't quite name. He glanced at the clock and then at the door. Marin was returning from a trip with her friends. They had gone off to celebrate her upcoming 30th birthday, and Asher was glad she had taken the time to relax. She deserved a break. She deserved to laugh, to have fun, and to get away from the constant demands of her busy teaching schedule. Still, something inside him felt tight, as though his chest were constricting. Maybe it was simply missing her. Maybe it was an irrational fear that something would change without him even realizing it. Life, he knew, had a way of flipping unexpectedly, from calm to chaos in an instant. He shook his head, trying to push the feeling away. On the dining table, a small vase with artificial lavender sat beside a photo of the two of them on a mountain trail. Marin had her hair in a high bun, and Asher wore his cap backwards. They were laughing, muddy, their ankles deep in the dirt. It was a memory of simpler times when life felt easy and light. Asher's phone buzzed occasionally with group texts or random notifications, but he ignored them. He just wanted to hear the sound of her car pulling into the garage. He wanted to hug her to show her the guest room he had just repainted. She had asked for a light gray, and he had picked the exact shade she loved. Standing in the middle of the living room, Asher took a deep breath. He was sure he was ready for a new chapter. But little did he know, the story he thought he was writing with Marin had already taken an unexpected turn. Meanwhile, as Asher waited, with his heart full of anticipation, Marin was savoring the last moments of her trip. What had started as a simple reunion with friends had slowly turned into something deeper and more confusing than she had expected. They had chosen a small seaside resort, far from the city's noise and their everyday responsibilities. The place felt suspended in time. The sky was clear, the ocean calm, and the afternoon stretched on as if the outside world didn't exist. It was the first time in many years that Marin had allowed herself to stop, not as a wife, not as a teacher, but as herself. Her conversations with her friends started off light, full of jokes and memories from college. But as the days passed, the talks grew more serious, touching on deeper, more delicate topics. Celine, as always, brought up the bolder subjects. She was the kind of woman who refused to follow conventions, intense and fearless, always speaking her mind, especially about freedom and life choices. "Do you really think this life is going to make you happy for the next 40 years?" she asked one night, her words slurred by wine as they sat around a makeshift bonfire. Marin smiled awkwardly, trying to change the subject, but Celine's question kept echoing inside her. Celine insisted that turning 30 was the last curve before life settled into predictability. "If you don't live now, you'll never do it," she said, gesturing at Marin. "You're amazing, Marin, smart, beautiful, but you live like you're already 60 and you don't even realize it." The next day, Marin walked alone along the beach, her feet sinking into the wet sand. She heard a voice behind her. It was Jackson, appearing as if he had always been part of the scene. Tall, easygoing, with a smile that seemed to hide secrets no one else knew. He introduced himself casually, mentioning he had noticed her group of friends and that he was staying nearby. Their conversation was light, just small talk, but within minutes, Marin felt something shift inside her. It wasn't love or immediate attraction, but a kind of unease, like someone had switched on a light in a forgotten room in her mind. Jackson complimented her on her speech, how attentive she was, her sense of humor. He even mentioned how different she seemed from the other women around her. Marin thanked him, a bit thrown off, but she didn't walk away. They continued talking until the sun began to set, casting a golden hue across the ocean. She avoided telling her friends about the encounter. But inside her head was spinning. She told herself it was just a harmless chat with a stranger. But the way he'd looked at her, listened to her words like they were worth hearing, that got to something inside her she hadn't realized was dormant at their second meeting at the resort's cafe. Marin wasn't even pretending it was a coincidence. Celine had noticed everything, and instead of judging, she encouraged her. "Maybe what you need is a small break, a moment to remember who you were before you became someone's wife." That phrase stuck in Marin's mind, someone's wife. Had she stopped being herself? Had she dissolved under responsibilities, routines, renovations, dinners, birthdays, bills? And more than that, did Asher still see something in her? Beyond the reliable, predictable partner who'd always been by his side. That night, the group went out to a nearby bar. The lights were dim, the music loud enough for intimate conversations. Jackson was there this time. He was waiting for her. He held out his hand like he was inviting her to dance. But he didn't head to the dance floor. He led her to a bar stool, ordered 2 drinks, and picked up right where they left off the day before, like they hadn't been apart. He talked about his travels, art, the choices he made and regretted. And in the middle of it, all he asked about her, not about the wife or the teacher, but about the old dreams. Marin might not even remember she had Celine's words echoed in her mind. Even if it's just one last time. That night it all happened. It wasn't planned, it wasn't logical. It was a quiet storm fueled by loneliness, doubt, and fear. Marin woke up before dawn, her heart tight, and a sense that something inside and outside her had shattered. She didn't cry, she didn't get angry. She just sat on the edge of the bed, staring at her hands like they held the weight of a choice she couldn't take back. At breakfast, her face was pale, her eyes distant. Her friends noticed, but didn't ask questions. Celine gave her a look that said more than any words could have, and Marin looked away, unable to face her own reflection in Celine's eyes. The next afternoon, Marin got on the plane back home with a suitcase, a phone full of photos, and a secret burning inside her like it could burst at any second. She kept telling herself that it would stay there in that beach town, in that humid night, in a memory nobody else knew, but deep down she already felt that guilt doesn't disappear just because we want it to. And no matter how normally she tried to act, something had changed. And Asher would notice. He always did. When Marin walked in the door, the silence broke only with the soft creak of it closing behind her. The suitcase slipped across the floor and stopped by the door frame. Asher stepped out from the hallway, drying his hands with a dish towel. He was wearing an apron stained with sauce, and a slight smile on his face. He walked over and hugged her firmly, like he was holding on to something precious that might slip away. She still wore the same perfume, but there was a different air about that embrace, a subtle squeeze, a faint tremble, like their bodies already knew what their hearts didn't. "Dare to say you're early," she said, her voice a bit husky. "I didn't want you coming home to an empty house." He replied, trying to keep things light. She forced a smile and let her eyes wander across the living room. Everything was spotless, flowers on the table, candles lit, soft music in the background. Something felt almost too calm there, like Asher had planned every detail to hide the storm he himself sensed coming. Are you going to take a shower? Dinner's almost ready. I made your favorite. She nodded slightly and headed to the bedroom. While showering, Marin's hands trembled. The steam on the mirror wasn't enough to hide her face or the heaviness in her eyes. She dried off quickly, threw on a light shirt, and went back to the living room. The smell of pasta with white mushroom sauce, her favorite, filled the air. He served their plates with care and pulled out a chair for her to sit. You know, I've been thinking these past few days. Asher began fiddling with his napkin. How great it'll be when this house is full of noise of all kinds of smells, you making that amazing morning coffee, me getting home and cooking something you like, just like tonight. She lowered her gaze. She knew where this could lead, but didn't stop him. She just listened. We've always talked about that, right? Having kids, putting a hammock in the garden, teaching them to plant a tree, letting them draw on the garage walls without scolding them, building something. You know, we never wanted luxury. We wanted a routine that mattered, and I believed in that so strongly that he paused, swallowing hard. That I even have a present for you. He walked to a drawer and took out a white envelope, blank on the outside. He came back with slow steps and held it out to her, open. Marin hesitated. Her heart was racing, like it knew what was coming even though she couldn't see it. Yet she opened the envelope carefully, almost in slow motion. When she pulled out the photos and saw the first one, she felt the blood drain from her face. There they were, printed out, her holding hands with Jackson on the beach, laughing with him at the bar, going into the hotel with him. Her body froze, her throat went dry for a moment. The world seemed to stop spinning. I hired a detective, Asher said softly, almost in a whisper. As soon as you left, I had a gut feeling. And it was right. He didn't yell, he didn't break anything. He just stayed there looking at her with eyes full of a silent pain that hurt more than any words could. It was like watching an entire castle crumble, not with explosions, but with cracks nobody wanted to see. Before Marin tried to speak, but nothing came out. Tears started rolling down her cheeks, and she covered her face with her hands for a few seconds. No sound came out, except for her sobs. Then between gasps, she tried, I don't know what happened. It was all so confusing. I felt lost, like everything was suffocating me. And I didn't know who I was anymore. It only happened once. It wasn't because I stopped loving you. It was because I was scared of losing myself. Asher stayed where he was. His eyes were red, but he didn't cry. There was just emptiness, a sharp silence. You destroyed something I built with my own hands, Marin, with every ounce of effort, with every choice. This house, this dream, it was all ours. But now it's just mine because you're no longer in it. She tried to stand to get closer, but he stepped back, not in anger, just sadness. That night they slept in separate rooms, and the silence between them was louder than any argument could have been. The next morning, she found some papers on the living room table. They lay there, cold and clear, like the decision he'd already made. No note, no explanation, just the papers. She stared at them for a long time, her eyes puffy and her face drawn. She knew that what she'd done had no undo button, and that in that envelope was the end of everything she had once sworn to protect. Time, which had once rushed by with renovations and plans, now crept slowly for Asher. After the divorce, he left the house he'd so lovingly restored and moved to a smaller city where almost no one knew his name. He wasn't exactly running away. He was trying to breathe, to find air in a place where the past wasn't painted on every wall. He rented a small apartment above a flower shop on a quiet street, surrounded by neighbors who minded their own business. In the first few days, Ash didn't talk much. He just worked. He fixed the plumbing for the lady next door, helped the grocery store owner hang a new sign, offered to paint peeling gates in exchange for strong coffee and a slice of apple pie. That's how he was starting over. No grand speeches, just quiet work and busy hands. In the sleepless nights, he stared at the ceiling and replayed scenes. He couldn't stop Marin's smile while testing paint on the walls, the smell of her hair after a shower, the way she always tucked her feet under herself on the couch. The memories came without warning, sometimes bringing tears, sometimes leaving an unbearable emptiness. He didn't try to move on with anyone else, not because he believed he'd never love again, but because he still carried an open wound, like someone who'd lost a piece of himself. It wasn't just being separated from Aeon, it was being cut off from everything he believed was solid. Asher avoided social media and mutual acquaintances, but he couldn't avoid a message that arrived one night. It was from Theo, Marin's brother, brief and to the point. Just like always, we need to talk, it's important. They met in a simple cafe near a park. Theo arrived first, stirring his coffee with anxious movements when Asher walked in. Theo stood, reached out for a handshake, his expression a mix of respect and sorrow. First of all, I'm not here to defend anyone, he began. I just thought you needed to know. Asher stayed quiet, waiting. Marin's pregnant for a second. The world seemed to spin faster. The coffee cup froze in Asher's hand. She's what pregnant? It's been a few weeks now. She found out after you two split. But according to the doctors, the pregnancy started before everything else. Asher leaned back in his chair like all the air had been knocked out of him. His mind was racing in 1,000 directions. At once he couldn't speak, just listened. Thea went on more calmly. She's in therapy. She cut off that friend Selene. She took a break from teaching. She's different. I can't explain. Quieter maybe. She didn't ask me to come see you. She doesn't even know I'm here, but I thought out of respect for everything you two had you should know about the baby. Asher just sat there staring into his empty glass. A child, something he'd always wanted, something they had dreamed about. And now it was coming into the world without that house, without those porch hugs, without a nest. Their conversation ended with no promises. Theo respected Asher's silence and left without pushing. He only left a note with the clinic's contact where Marin was having her checkups. And then 4 weeks Asher slipped back into his own world. He wandered the streets aimlessly, buried himself in work, tried not to think. But it was no use. The image followed him everywhere. A child with eyes that might look like hers, or a baby sleeping in the crib. He never got to set up a midnight cry, a first wobbly step, a little voice saying Daddy. He pictured it all like he was watching a movie. He couldn't pause. One day, while passing by a children's store, he noticed a tiny pair of knitted booties in the window. They were blue with little bear-shaped buttons. That was all it took. He stopped, took a deep breath, and felt something break inside him, but this time it wasn't his heart. It was his fear, his pride, the idea that the end of their relationship was the end of everything. That baby wasn't to blame. It hadn't asked to be born into broken promises and shattered hearts. But it existed, it was real. And if Asher knew anything, it was that he didn't want a child to grow up not knowing his father, even if he and Marin never went back to what they were, that boy or girl deserved a different beginning. He returned home that night resolute. He opened the drawer where he kept old photos, letters they'd exchanged, sketches of how the house would look. He pulled out a blank sheet of paper. He wrote a few lines. After all that silence, it was time to make the first call. 6 months had passed since that tense conversation in the cafe. Asher and Theo stayed in touch, a bit exchanging short, direct messages. But on a Sunday afternoon, between a building supply delivery and fixing a fence at a nearby farm, Asher decided to text Marin. Her answer was simple, with no questions or demands. They arranged to meet at a tree park in a quiet spot where the branches provided enough shade to soften the midday sun, but didn't hide faces or intentions. When Marin arrived, Asher almost didn't recognize her. It wasn't her clothes or hairstyle, it was her demeanor. She wasn't wearing makeup like she was done trying to hide her pain. Her eyes looked calmer, but still showed signs of sleepless nights. And she stood with a slight hunch, not so much from the pregnancy weight, but from whatever she was carrying inside her soul. She didn't apologize or burst into tears right away. She didn't bring up anything that no longer belonged to both of them. She just talked about the baby, how alone she'd felt those first few weeks, how she went quietly to her appointments afraid of hearing people's opinions, how she'd cried at night, hugging a pillow, wishing she could turn back time. But knowing she couldn't, she mentioned the first little kick she felt while listening to a song they used to dance to, and how she wondered if Asher still remembered the lyrics. He listened without interrupting. Every word she spoke felt like a needle in his chest, but also like a thread stitching up what was torn. This was Marin. She was still there, maybe not the same woman from before, maybe not exactly the person he thought he fully knew, but it was still her. And something in him still recognized that heart. After that day, Asher began to be present, gently, respectfully. He went with her to appointments, helped her pick out a crib, set up a little nursery in his new place, very simple, with recycled furniture and a softly painted blue wall. He'd run his hand over the crib and imagine his child sleeping there. They didn't talk about the past. They didn't talk about the future either, just the present. The birth was calm, but intense. Asher held her hand the entire time. Marin sweated and shook, but found strength in his gaze when the baby was born, crying loudly and bursting with life. He was the first to hold him, his eyes filled with tears. But they didn't fall. There was only a heavy, profound silence, like all the noise in the world had suddenly vanished. He looked at his son, at that tiny life, and something inside him softened. They moved back into together, not like before. Now every gesture was more cautious, more deliberate. There were no vows, no promises, just being there. He got up at night for feedings, rocked the baby with made-up lullabies, did the shopping, and made the morning coffee. She used to make the routine seem to work, until one night, while Marin was putting away little jars of baby food, Asher called her name in a different tone. "Marin, we need to talk." She turned around, still holding a spoon in her hand. There was something in his voice that made the room go cold. Sure, what is it? He took a slow breath, looked at the crib, where the baby was sleeping peacefully, and spoke in a steady but gentle voice. I want a paternity test. Time froze for a second. Marin just stood there like she didn't understand, but she did, and fast the spoon. Fell to the floor, though it took her a moment to realize what I love this baby. You know that I take care of him like he's mine. Because that's what I feel. But I need to know for sure. I need certainty, not because I don't trust you, but because this doubt, it's eating me up inside. But he's yours, Asher. I am sure. He just looked at her with the weary eyes of a man who'd spent many nights thinking. Rethinking, losing sleep in silence. I'm glad you're sure. But I'm not. She wanted to scream that it was offensive, but the words got stuck. Because in his expression there was no malice, no desire for revenge. There was pain, a genuine need. And something even more terrifying. The doubt started to creep into her own mind. What if he wasn't? What if that one night, that stupid, awful night, was the outlier? That now weighed like a stone on everything. The next few weeks were torture. Marin cried in secret. She'd watch her son sleeping and quietly pray that God wouldn't let him be another man's child. Every time Asher looked at the baby, she'd imagine him searching for familiar features, comparing little details. T.S. anxiety ate away at her. Waiting for the test results felt like a punishment that never ended. The night the envelope arrived, Asher placed it on the table. He didn't open it right away. He just stared at that white paper like it was an abyss he was about to face. Do you want me to open it with you? She asked in a shaky voice. He shook his head, picked up the envelope, and slowly tore it open. His hands were cold. Marin stood there frozen in place, tears already rolling down her cheeks. Before the answer was even revealed, Asher broke the seal, removed the paper, and read silently. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, then looked at her, his eyes wet. But now different. There was relief. He's my son. Marin collapsed, dropping to the floor in tears. He walked over, knelt beside her, and held her for the first time since everything had happened. That hug wasn't just consolation, it was relief. It was belonging. It was something that finally had a chance to move forward. Because in that moment, doubt gave way to certainty. And sometimes certainty is what saves whatever's left after the storm. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notification so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.